My name is Maya, and I'm 32 years old. For years, my family saw the one thing that kept me whole as a sign that I was broken. They looked at my service dog, Ranger, and they didn't see a partner, a lifeline, or a highly trained professional. They saw a crutch, a fluffy, four-legged symbol of a weakness they wished I would just get over. They never imagined that on the coldest, most terrifying day of our lives, that crutch would become the only thing standing between them and a silent, frozen grave. They thought they were trapped by an act of God, but they would be saved by the very thing they'd dismissed as my failure. Before I tell you the story of how my family's condescension nearly cost them everything, and how the bond they mocked turned out to be their salvation, I'd love to know where you're all watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt misunderstood by the people who are supposed to know you best, go ahead and hit that like button. For all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe, because this is a community for people who know what it's like to have to fight to be seen for who you really are. It all started, or perhaps I should say it all came to a head, with the annual family ski trip. It was a tradition my father, Richard, held on to with a white-knuckled grip, a mandatory command performance for his wife and 2 children. For my older brother, Leo, it was a delight, another chance to excel, to carve perfect lines into fresh powder and earn our father's booming approval. For me, it was a week-long exercise in anxiety management. Every year, the location got more luxurious, the expectations higher, and the space for me to just be myself smaller. This year was the worst yet. Dad had bought a new cabin, a sprawling log and glass palace nestled deep in a remote mountain range, miles from the nearest town. He called it an escape. For me, it felt like a cage. The source of my family's quiet, persistent disappointment was sitting in the passenger seat of my truck as I made the long drive up the winding mountain road. Ranger, a magnificent German shepherd with a coat the color of sable and eyes like warm amber, was my service dog. He was the calm anchor in the turbulent sea of my post-deployment anxiety. After 2 tours as a combat medic, the world outside the wire felt too loud, too fast, too unpredictable. The hypervigilance that kept me alive in Afghanistan became a suffocating blanket at home. Ranger was trained to mitigate that. He could sense the subtle shift in my breathing that preceded a panic attack. The restless energy that meant a flashback was clawing at the edges of my mind. He would apply deep pressure therapy by leaning his solid 90-pound frame against me, or interrupt a dissociative state by nudging his cold nose into my hand, grounding me in the here and now. He was my partner. To my family, he was a problem. My father, a man forged in the belief that emotional wounds were best ignored until they scarred over into something you could call character, saw Ranger as a public declaration of my fragility. My mother, Eleanor, a woman who measured the world in appearances, worried that a service dog made us look complicated. And Leo, the golden boy investment banker, treated Ranger with a kind of casual, amused disdain, as if he were a security blanket I'd failed to outgrow. They didn't understand the rigorous training, the hundreds of hours Ranger and I had put in, not just for anxiety response, but for my own passion project, search and rescue. I had found a strange peace in the meticulous, demanding world of SAR training. It took the skills the Army had given me, discipline, situational awareness, trauma care, and repurposed them for something hopeful. Ranger, with his incredible nose and boundless drive, excelled at it. We were a certified team, volunteering with the county unit whenever we could. I tried to explain it to my family once, showing them a photo of Ranger locating a victim hidden in a collapsed structure during a training exercise. My father had squinted at the photo. "A hobby is fine, Maya," he'd said, his tone implying it was on par with macrame. "But you need to be thinking about your real future." Their dismissal of this part of my life, the part I was most proud of, stung more than anything. It was a part of me they couldn't critique or try to fix, so they simply pretended it didn't matter. Pulling up the long snow-covered driveway to the new cabin, I felt the familiar tension coil in my stomach. The place was impressive, I had to admit. 3 stories of gleaming pine logs and massive plate glass windows that looked out over a breathtaking vista of jagged, snow-dusted peaks. It was also profoundly isolated. No other homes in sight, just endless miles of silent, white forest. Ranger whined softly from the passenger seat, sensing the change in my mood. I reached over and scratched behind his ears, his fur a familiar, comforting texture. "It's okay, buddy," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "We just have to get through the week." Leo's luxury SUV was already parked, and he was on the wraparound deck, holding a mug of something steaming. He grinned as I got out. "Look what the blizzard dragged in," he called out, and she brought her emotional support system. I ignored the jibe, opening the rear door to let Ranger hop out. "Hey Leo, the place looks big. Dad's monument to his own success," Leo said with a wry smile. "Wait till you see the hot tub. Seats 12. My parents came out the front door, my mother already wrapped in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Hey, Heather was beaming, his chest puffed out with pride. "Hey, Mie, you made it."
Hey.
"What do you think?" "It's beautiful, Dad," I said honestly. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was always a little too forceful. His eyes immediately went to Ranger, who stood calmly by my side, his official service vest clearly visible. My father's smile tightened. "Right. Well, come on in. Just, leave the dog on the porch for a minute, will you?" Eleanor just had the floors done. The cold that washed over me had nothing to do with the mountain air. It was a familiar, sinking chill. "Dad, no, he's not a pet. He's a service animal. He has to be with me. It's the law." I hated the defensive tremor in my voice. "Richard, for heaven's sake," my mother whispered, pulling at his arm. My father held his ground, his face a mask of stubbornness. "I'm not saying he's not allowed in the house, Maya. I'm just saying, the main living area, it's all new furniture, white rugs. Can't he just stay in your room or in the mudroom? His job is to be with me," I repeated, my voice firmer now. I could feel Ranger shift, pressing his side against my leg. He knew. If I'm in the living area, he's in the living area. He's medical equipment, just like a wheelchair or an oxygen tank. He won't be on the furniture. He's more disciplined than any of us. Leo snorted from the deck. "Dad, it's not a dog. It's a 4-legged Xanax. Just let it go." The condescension in his tone was like a needle under the skin. My father, seeing he was outnumbered by my mother's frantic desire to avoid a scene, and my own refusal to budge, finally relented with a heavy, put-upon sigh. "Fine. Just keep him on a tight leash, so to speak." He turned and walked back inside, the joy of my arrival already evaporated. My mother gave me a watery, apologetic smile, and followed him. Leo sauntered over, peering down at Ranger. "He really that essential? You can't even get through saying hello to your own family without him?" "He helps me stay calm, Leo," I said, my jaw tight. "Your presence is having the opposite effect." He just laughed, shaking his head as if I were a hopelessly eccentric child. "Whatever you say, sis. Welcome to paradise." I watched him walk inside, then looked down at Ranger. He looked up at me, his amber eyes full of unwavering, uncomplicated loyalty. The first battle of the week was over, and I had won, but it felt like a hollow victory. The lines had been drawn, the same old lines, and the trip had barely begun. The condescension wasn't just an occasional comment. It was the very air we breathed in that beautiful remote cage. That first evening, it unfurled like a toxic fog, seeping into every interaction. We gathered in the great room, a cavernous space, with a cathedral ceiling, and a stone fireplace, large enough to roast a whole ox. Ranger was lying dutifully at my feet on the polished hardwood floor, a silent, furry island of calm in my churning sea of unease. My father, having lost the battle of the dog, was now on a mission to assert his authority in other ways. He was holding court, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, talking about Leo's latest promotion, a vice presidency at 34. Dad boomed, clapping Leo on the back. "That's my boy. a real go-getter, building a future. He then turned his gaze to me, and the warmth in his eyes cooled by several degrees. So Maya, what about you? Still playing with the dog? The question was designed to sound casual, but it was a precision strike. I felt my mother shift uncomfortably on the plush white sofa. I'm a certified SAR handler, Dad. We had a call-out just last month. A lost hiker up on Mount Adams. We found him. Leo smirked into his own drink. Did you? Or did the dog? We're a team, Leo, I said, trying to keep my voice even. That's the point. It's a nice hobby, dear. My mother chimed in, her voice placating. It's wonderful that you're keeping busy, but your father has a point. It's not exactly a career path, is it? We just worry about your stability. Stability. It was their code word for conformity. A 9-to-5 job, a mortgage in a respectable suburb, a life that fit neatly into their Christmas newsletter. My life, with its invisible scars and its canine guardian, was a messy, inconvenient narrative they didn't know how to spin. I tried to explain, to make them see the value in what I did, the purpose it gave me. It's more than a hobby, it's a skill. It saves lives. I'm also taking online courses in emergency management. I'm building a future, just a different one. My father waved a dismissive hand. Online courses, that's all well and good, but you need to get back out into the real world, a real job. You were a medic, for God's sake. A hospital would hire you in a second. He didn't understand, or refused to, that the chaotic, high-stress environment of a hospital emergency room was a minefield of triggers for me. The very skills he praised were intertwined with the trauma he wanted me to forget. The smell of antiseptic, the frantic beeping of monitors, the controlled panic. It was all too close to the bone-jarring reality of a field hospital after an IED blast. Ranger was what allowed me to navigate the real world at all, but explaining that felt like admitting the very weakness they were so determined to see. The conversation was mercifully interrupted by my mother announcing it was time for the gift exchange, another of my father's cherished traditions. Leo, of course, was gifted a brand new set of professional backcountry skis, the kind that cost a small fortune. My mother received a diamond tennis bracelet that made her gasp. Then it was my turn. My father handed me a flat, rectangular package. I unwrapped it to find a hardback book with a serene pastel cover. The Mindful Path to Overcoming Anxiety. Next came a small envelope from my mother. Inside was a gift certificate for a luxury spa in the city. A full day of relaxation, she said, her smile bright and brittle, to help you unwind. I stared at the gifts, a book and a spa day, and felt a profound, hollow ache. They were gifts not for me, but for the person they wanted me to be. They were prescriptions, cures for my perceived ailment. They saw a problem to be solved, not a daughter to be understood. I murmured my thanks, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I could feel a familiar tremor starting in my hands, a low hum of electricity under my skin. Ranger, without lifting his head, shifted his weight and rested his chin firmly on my foot. The gentle pressure was a signal, a silent, "I'm here." I focused on that feeling, on the solid weight of him, and took a slow, deep breath. Later that night, the house quiet, except for the crackling of the dying fire. I was heading to my downstairs bedroom when I heard my parents' voices from their own room, the door slightly ajar. I stopped. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. She's just so dependent on that animal. My father's voice was a low grumble of frustration. It's not healthy, Eleanor. It's been 5 years since she got out. When does she just move on? When do we get our old daughter back? Richard, be patient, my mother soothed. These things take time. The book was a good idea. A book isn't going to fix this. She's hiding behind that dog, using it as an excuse not to live a normal life. What happens when the dog is gone? What then? She'll fall apart. Every word was a small, sharp blow. Hiding, excuse, fall apart. I couldn't listen anymore. I pushed their door open a little wider. They both looked up, startled. My father had the decency to look momentarily ashamed. My mother just looked flustered. "He helps me," I said, my voice quiet but shaking with a hurt so deep it felt ancient. His name is Ranger, and he helps me live my life. He's not an excuse. Why can't you just accept that?" My father stood up, his face hardening again into his familiar mask of paternal certainty. "We just want what's best for you, Maya. We want to see you strong again. The strong girl we raised. Maybe this is what strong looks like now," I whispered. "Maybe you just don't recognize it." The argument went nowhere, as it always did. It circled the same drain of their disappointment and my inability to make them understand. It ended with my father's final crushing pronouncement. "We just want our daughter back, Maya. The one who didn't need a dog to get through the day." I retreated to my room without another word, the door clicking shut behind me. The silence was absolute. I sank onto the bed and finally let the tears come, hot and silent. Ranger immediately hopped onto the bed with me, something he was trained not to do unless given a specific command. But he knew. He broke the rule because he knew I needed him to. He pushed his head under my hand, and then laid his whole body alongside mine, a warm, breathing wall against the cold loneliness of their misunderstanding. I buried my face in his fur, and for the first time that day, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. It was anger, a clean, sharp anger that burned away the tears. Maybe they didn't recognize my strength, but I did, and so did the magnificent animal, who was currently licking the salt from my cheeks. The next morning, the air in the cabin was thick with unspoken words. Breakfast was a tense affair, the clinking of silverware on plates unnaturally loud in the silence. My father, in an attempt to reclaim the cheerful, commanding role he preferred, laid out the day's plan with forced enthusiasm. He, my mother, and Leo were going to tackle the Black Creek Trail, a backcountry route known for its challenging terrain and stunning views. It was exactly the kind of high-risk, high-reward excursion my father loved, a way to conquer nature and prove his mettle. "The powder will be waist-deep. It's going to be epic," Leo declared, already dressed in his high-tech ski gear. My father looked at me, a challenge in his eyes. "You ready to go, Maya?" I took a sip of my coffee, feeling Ranger's steady presence at my feet. The anger from the night before had solidified into a quiet resolve. I wasn't going to spend another day trying to fit into a box they had built for me. "No," I said simply. "I think Ranger and I will stick to the marked trails near the cabin. It's safer." The word "safers" hung in the air, a direct contradiction to my father's entire ethos. His face darkened. "Safer? Maya, you can't let this anxiety rule your life. It's a bluebird day. There's nothing to be afraid of." "I'm not afraid," I said, meeting his gaze. "I'm being smart." There were avalanche warnings posted all along the drive up. That much new powder on a steep base is a risk. My training tells me to be cautious. Leo let out a short, derisive laugh. "Oh, here we go. Saint Maya and her CR training." "Dad, she's just making an excuse. She doesn't want to go." He turned to me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Suit yourself. More fresh powder for us." My mother wrung her hands. "Maybe she's right, Richard. The signs did look serious." "Nonsense," my father scoffed, his pride now fully engaged. "I've been skiing these mountains for 30 years. I know how to read the snow. We have our transceivers. We'll be perfectly fine." He saw my decision not as a calculated choice based on my expertise, but as another symptom of my weakness, another win for the anxiety he so despised. He saw it as a personal rejection of him. He grabbed his helmet from the table. "Well, we're not going to let a little bit of fear ruin a perfect day. Let's go." They left a few minutes later, a flurry of brightly colored Gore-Tex and clomping ski boots. The silence they left behind was a relief. It was the first time in a long time I had set a boundary with my father and held it, and while it had caused friction, it also felt like a small personal victory. I watched from the window as they skied away, 3 figures shrinking against the vast, white expanse, heading towards the jagged peaks that loomed over the cabin. For the next hour, I savored the peace. I let Ranger out to play in the deep snow, laughing as he bounded and burrowed, sending up plumes of white powder with his nose. He was a different animal out here, alive and joyful. After he'd tired himself out, we set off on our own walk, following a well-marked trail that wound through the forest on the lower part of the mountain, a safe distance from any potential slide paths. The air was crisp and clean, the sky a piercing, cloudless blue. The only sound was the crunch of my snowshoes and the gentle panting of the dog at my side. Surrounded by the silent majesty of the pines, my mind drifted back, not to the argument, but further back, to the source of it all. A brief, searing flash of memory, the cacophony of a C-130's interior, the smell of jet fuel and blood, the desperate pressure of my hands on a young soldier's chest, trying to hold in a life that was slipping away too fast. It wasn't the gore that haunted me, it was the feeling of helplessness, the roaring chaos I couldn't control. That was the ghost I lived with. Ranger, as if sensing the shift in my thoughts, nudged his head against my hand, his presence a solid, unwavering anchor in the present moment. He was the antithesis of that chaos. He was order, purpose, and unconditional calm. He was the reason I could stand here, in the middle of this vast wilderness, and feel peace instead of panic. We had walked for perhaps a mile, the cabin out of sight, behind a thick stand of trees, when Ranger suddenly stopped dead. His ears went up, rotating like radar dishes. His body went rigid, and a low, guttural whine started deep in his chest. I stopped, listening. At first I heard nothing. Then it came. A low, subterranean rumble. A vibration I felt more in the soles of my boots than I heard with my ears. It wasn't thunder. It was deeper, more menacing. The rumble grew steadily, swelling into a deafening, grinding roar that seemed to shake the very mountains. A flock of birds exploded from the treetops, screeching in alarm. The ground beneath my feet trembled. My blood ran cold. My military training, my SAR training, my entire being screamed one word: Avalanche. The roar went on for what felt like an eternity, then gradually subsided, leaving behind a silence that was more terrifying than the noise itself, a heavy, profound stillness. I looked at Ranger. He was staring back up the mountain, in the direction we had come from, the direction of the cabin, the direction my family had gone. No, I whispered, the word a puff of frozen air. I didn't wait. I broke into a desperate, lung-searing run, my snowshoes sinking and catching in the deep powder. Ranger, all playfulness gone, was a streaking black and tan missile, loping ahead of me. We scrambled back up the trail, my heart hammering against my ribs with a frantic, sickening rhythm. I rounded the final bend, the spot where the cabin should have been visible, and my world tilted on its axis. It was gone. The entire mountainside had given way. Where the magnificent, 3-story log cabin had stood, there was now only a vast, churning sea of white. A monstrous tongue of snow, ice and shattered trees had cascaded down the slope, burying everything in its path under a tomb of white. The scale of it was breathtakingly horrific. There was no roof, no wall, no sign of life, just a silent, sterile field of avalanche debris, glittering under the pristine blue sky. For a paralyzing moment, I could do nothing but stare, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. They're under there. Dad, Mom, Leo, they're under the snow. The thought was so catastrophic it had no weight, no reality. Then the panic hit, a tidal wave of pure, undiluted terror that threatened to drown me. I was alone, miles from anywhere, no cell service, just me and a dog and a mountain of snow. My breath came in ragged, useless gasps. The world started to telescope, the edges of my vision going dark. This is it, a voice in my head whispered. This is where you fall apart, just like he said you would. Then a cold, wet nose shoved hard against my trembling hand. Ranger whined, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the fog of panic. I looked down into his eyes, and what I saw there wasn't fear. It was focus, expectation. He was waiting for a command. He was ready to work. His focus became my focus. The panic receded, replaced by the ice-cold clarity of training. My brain, a muscle honed by years of emergency response, began to fire in sequence, assess the situation. They were trapped. Air supply was their most critical limitation. The weight of the snow could have crushed the structure, or it could have created a pocket. I had to assume it was a pocket. Time is the enemy. Every second counted. What are my assets? I had myself, I had Ranger, and I had my Sarah kit in my truck. My truck. It was parked further down the access road, hopefully below the slide path. That was my first objective. I looked at the debris field. It was unstable, a treacherous landscape of shifting snow and hidden crevices. Going straight across was suicide. I had to go around. "Okay, buddy," I said, my voice hoarse and shaky. But it was a start. I was giving a command. I was in control. Heel. We began to move, skirting the edge of the slide zone. It was a brutal, exhausting trek through thigh-deep snow. My body screamed in protest, but my mind was clear, locked on the task ahead. Get the gear, get the gear, get the gear. After a grueling 20 minutes, I saw it. My truck, untouched, a beautiful, mundane island in a world of chaos. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers clumsy with cold and adrenaline. I threw open the back and pulled out my emergency pack: Avalanche shovel, probe, a small first aid kit, extra layers, water, and an avalanche beacon. My own transceiver. I switched it on, sweeping it across the debris field. Nothing. Either they were too deep, their own beacons were off, or they were broken. Relying on the beacons was a long shot. The sheer size of the slide area was overwhelming. It was acres and acres of snow. Finding the cabin was like finding a single grain of sand on a vast beach. I could probe for hours, for days, and find nothing. Despair began to prick at the edges of my focus again. It was impossible. I looked at Ranger. He hadn't been waiting. While I was gearing up, he had already begun to work. His nose was to the snow, and he was casting back and forth in a zigzag pattern, the way I had taught him 100 times in training scenarios. He was running a scent grid. He wasn't just my emotional support anymore. He wasn't a crutch. He was a highly specialized piece of search equipment, and he was the only asset I had that could narrow this impossible field down to a single life-saving point. The hope that bloomed in my chest was fierce and painful. It all came down to him, to us. I took a deep breath of the freezing air, the cold searing my lungs. I clicked the strap of my helmet into place and grabbed my shovel. I was no longer just Maya, the broken daughter. I was Maya, the Sarah handler. And this was no longer a family vacation. It was a rescue operation. "Okay, Ranger," I called out, my voice ringing with a newfound authority in the vast silence. "Find them. Go find them." He barked once, a sharp, affirmative sound, and charged onto the sea of white, his nose to the ground, his entire being focused on a single, desperate task. The sun, which had been so bright and cheerful just an hour before, now seemed like a mocking, indifferent eye in the sky. It was beginning its slow descent towards the western peaks, and I knew that with the darkness would come a catastrophic drop in temperature. Time was a physical weight pressing down on me. I followed Ranger onto the debris field, my snowshoes providing a precarious purchase on the unstable, shifting surface. The snow was a bizarre mixture of textures: light powder in some places, heavy, compacted slabs like concrete in others. Shattered tree limbs and chunks of rock were embedded in the white, a testament to the violence of the slide. Ranger worked with a focus that was nothing short of awe-inspiring. He ignored me completely, his entire world compressed into the scents carried on the cold air. He moved in the methodical grid pattern we had practiced endlessly, his nose skimming the surface of the snow, occasionally plunging his whole head in to get a deeper read. I followed 10 paces behind, my eyes scanning the terrain for any visual clues: a piece of clothing, a ski pole, anything, and my ears straining against the profound silence. I shouted their names until my throat was raw. "Dad, Mom, Leo, can you hear me?" My voice was a tiny, pathetic thing, swallowed instantly by the immense, indifferent wilderness. The only reply was the whisper of the wind through the remaining pines. An hour passed, then another. The physical toll was immense. My legs burned, my back ached from the tension, and the cold was beginning to seep deep into my bones, despite my layers. but the mental toll was worse. With every fruitless pass Ranger made, a little more of my fierce hope eroded, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. What if they weren't in a pocket? What if the cabin had been obliterated? What if I was searching for bodies, not survivors? I pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the dog. Trust the dog. It was the first rule of being a handler. We were working a section near the center of the slide path when Ranger's behavior changed. His methodical zigzag broke. He stopped, his head held high, his nose twitching as he tested the air. Then he dropped his nose to the snow and began to move with a new, frantic urgency, his tail low and rigid. He was on to something. My heart, which had been a dull, anxious drum, began to pound with a wild, hopeful rhythm. "What is it, buddy? What have you got?" I whispered, my voice tight with anticipation. He led me another 50 yards, to a place that looked no different from any other part of this desolate white landscape. But here, he became frantic. He started digging furiously, sending up fountains of snow with his front paws, whining with an intensity that vibrated through the air. He would dig, then stop and look back at me, his amber eyes blazing with a message that was as clear as a spoken sentence. "They are here, right here." This was it. The alert. The moment all our training had been for. Adrenaline surged through me, washing away the fatigue. "Good boy, Ranger. Good boy." I dropped to my knees beside him and began to dig. It was like trying to shovel wet concrete. The snow was heavy, dense, and brutally compacted by its own weight. I dug with a desperate, primal energy, my arms and shoulders screaming in protest. I wasn't just digging snow. I was digging for my family. After a few minutes of frantic shoveling, I switched to the probe. I drove the long, thin aluminum pole down into the snow, feeling for any change in resistance. Snow, snow, snow. Then thunk. It hit something solid, not a rock. The feedback was different. A dull, hollow sound. It was wood. I had found the roof. A sob of relief and terror escaped my lips. I cleared the snow from the area where the probe had made contact and began to pound on the wooden surface with the handle of my shovel. "Dad, Mom, Leo, can you hear me? Answer me if you can hear me." I held my breath, listening. Silence. My heart sank. I pounded again, harder, screaming their names, and then I heard it. Faint, muffled but unmistakable. A sound from within, a voice. "Aya, is that you?" It was Leo. He was alive. They were alive. The relief was so overwhelming it almost buckled my knees. "Leo, yes, it's me. Are you okay? Are Mom and Dad with you?" His voice came back, stronger this time, laced with disbelief and a terror I had never heard from my cocky older brother before. "Maya, oh my God. Maya, yes, we're here. The whole cabin, it just collapsed. We're trapped in the kitchen. It's the only part that held. Mom's hurt her leg. I think it's broken. Dad's, he's just sitting here. He won't talk. Are you alone?" "Yes, I'm alone," I called back, my mind racing. "Leo, I need you to guide me. Where is the nearest window or door from where you are?" He gave me a direction, and I started digging again, this time with the focused fury of a rescue machine. The snow was impossibly deep, a solid 12-foot wall between me and them. As I dug, I talked to him, keeping him focused, getting information. They were cold, their power was out, and they had no idea how long they'd been there. The reality of their situation, and of the identity of their sole rescuer, was slowly dawning on him. Ranger didn't leave my side. He sat patiently a few feet away, a silent, furry sentinel watching my progress. His job of location done, he was my anchor, his calm presence a stark contrast to the chaos of the situation. It felt like hours, but it was probably only 30 minutes before my shovel struck glass. I had found a window. With a final, desperate burst of energy, I cleared the snow away from the frame. It was a small kitchen window, now buried under a mountain. I used the edge of my shovel to break the pane, the sound of shattering glass, sharp and violent in the stillness. A rush of stale, cold air puffed out from the opening. I cleared the remaining shards of glass from the frame and shone my headlamp into the darkness. Leo, I'm through. A pale, grimy face appeared in the opening. My brother's eyes were wide with shock and fear. He stared at me, then his gaze shifted to the big dog, sitting calmly in the snow beside me. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He just stared, the full, impossible truth of the situation landing on him like a physical blow. The sister he mocked, the dog he dismissed as a joke, they were his saviors. Come on, I urged, my voice gentle but firm. I'll help you out. I braced myself and pulled him through the small opening. He stumbled out into the snow, collapsing onto hands and knees, gasping the fresh, cold air. He looked at me, at Ranger, and then at the terrifying wall of white that had been his tomb. Then I helped my mother through. She was crying, her face streaked with tears and dust, her leg clearly injured. She clung to me, her usual concerns about appearances burned away by raw fear and gratitude. Finally, I helped my father. He emerged slowly, a man I had never seen before. The arrogant, booming patriarch was gone. In his place was a stooped, ashen-faced old man, his eyes hollow with shock. He stood on the snow, swaying slightly. He looked at me, his daughter, covered in sweat and snow, holding a shovel. Then he looked at Ranger, who sat watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. He looked at the vast, silent field of snow that had so nearly been his grave, a monument to his own hubris, the dam of his pride, a structure I had thought was more invincible than the mountain itself, finally crumbled into dust. He opened his mouth, but like Leo, he couldn't speak. He just looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw it all. The shock, the shame, the terror, and a dawning, humbling realization that was more profound than any apology he could ever have spoken. In the immediate aftermath of the breakthrough, there was a strange, suspended silence. The four of us stood in the deepening twilight on the snowfield that had almost been their grave, and the only sounds the ragged gasps of our own breathing and the soft whisper of the wind. The condescension that had defined our family dynamic for years was gone, scoured away by the raw, terrifying reality of what had just happened. It was replaced by a fragile, disbelieving awe. My family looked at me, then at Ranger, as if seeing us both for the first time. I moved quickly, my training taking over. I pulled the emergency blankets from my pack and wrapped one around my mother's shoulders, then my father's, then Leo's. We need to get moving, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. The temperature is dropping fast. We can't stay here. My truck is about a half-mile hike from here. My father, who had been staring at Ranger with a look of profound bewilderment, finally found his voice. It was a hoarse, broken whisper. I was wrong, Maya. He took a shaky step forward and reached out a trembling hand, not to me, but to my dog. He laid his hand on Ranger's head, a gesture of such reverence it made my breath catch in my throat. This was the man who wouldn't let the dog in his living room. About everything. Thank you. Ranger, in his infinite, gentle wisdom, simply leaned into the touch. Leo, who had been a frozen statue of shock, finally moved. He looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. How did you even find us? I just nodded towards Ranger. He did. His SAR training. He smelled you under the snow. Leo shook his head slowly, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. The four-legged Xanax, the emotional support blanket, was a highly trained specialist who had just saved his life. The weight of his own casual cruelty seemed to land on him all at once. I'm so sorry, Maya, he whispered. The journey out was a slow, grueling ordeal. My mother couldn't put any weight on her leg, so Leo and I had to half-carry, half-drag her through the deep, treacherous snow. It was a stark reversal of our usual roles. I was in command, giving quiet, firm directions, assessing the safest path, calling out warnings about unstable footing. For the first time in my life, my family followed my lead without question, without a single word of doubt. My father, the man who was always at the front, the trailblazer, now brought up the rear, his steps slow and unsteady, his gaze fixed on the back of his daughter, the one he had so profoundly underestimated. The family hierarchy had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. When we finally reached my truck, the sight of it was like a beacon from another world, a world of safety and normalcy. Getting everyone settled inside was a painful, awkward process, but we managed. I drove slowly down the mountain road, until, finally, a single bar of service appeared on my phone. Then two. I pulled over and called 911. The official county rescue team met us at the base of the mountain. Paramedics immediately took over, assessing my mother's leg and checking my father and brother for signs of hypothermia or shock. The team leader, a weathered man named Captain Evans, whom I knew from my SAR trainings, came over to debrief me. He listened intently as I recounted the events, his eyes sharp and professional. He looked from the massive slide path visible up the mountain, to me, and then to Ranger sitting faithfully by the truck's open door. He shook his head in amazement. "You dug them out? By yourself?" "Ranger found them," I corrected. "I just did the digging." Captain Evans walked over to Ranger and knelt, scratching him behind the ears. "You saved them, Maya," he said, his voice loud enough for my family, huddled nearby in blankets, to hear clearly. "That cabin is under 15, maybe 20 feet of heavy, compacted snow. Our team wouldn't have even started a probe search until morning. You saved their lives. Ours. You saved them. Not many people could have done that. That's one hell of a dog you've got." I saw my father flinch at the captain's words. It wasn't a flinch of shame, but of recognition. The external validation from a man so obviously competent and in charge, a man my father would instinctively respect, cemented the new reality in a way my own words never could have. His daughter, the one he thought was broken and hiding from the world, had single-handedly orchestrated their rescue. Her Crutch was the hero of the hour. The story he had told himself about me, about my life, had been irrevocably, undeniably shattered. A few months later, the snows had melted, and spring was breathing new life into the mountains. The family dynamic had undergone a thaw of its own, just as profound. I was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner, a ritual I used to dread, but now approached with a quiet sense of peace. The most telling change was a small one. By the stone fireplace in the living room, where the priceless white rug used to be, there was now a large, comfortable dog bed. Ranger was asleep on it, his paws twitching as he dreamed, completely and utterly accepted as a member of the family. After dinner, my father asked me to join him on the back porch. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the sun set. He had apologized in the hospital, a frantic, jumbled mess of words born from shock. But this was different. This was calm and considered. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice quiet, "about that day, about everything before it." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were clear of the old stubborn pride. "I was a fool, Maya. I was so wrapped up in my own idea of what strength was supposed to look like. I couldn't see the real thing, standing right in front of me. I thought strength was about not needing help, about just gritting your teeth and pushing through." He shook his head, a wry, sad smile on his face. "You and Ranger, you taught me something on that mountain. Strength isn't about not needing help. It's about having the wisdom to know what help you need and the courage to accept it. I was scared. I didn't understand what you went through over there, and I didn't know how to fix it. So I got angry at the one thing that was actually helping you. I am so deeply sorry." Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of hurt. They were tears of release. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered. "That means a lot." Leo had changed too. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a new humility. He had started volunteering his time not on the trail but with his own skills. He was managing the fundraising and grant writing for our county SAR team. He told me about it a few weeks after the accident, his tone earnest. "I get it now, Maya," he'd said. "What you and Ranger do, it's not a hobby, it's a calling. I want to help. I want to make sure the teams have the funding they need to do what you do." He was finding his own way to say thank you, to make amends, but the biggest change wasn't in them, it was in me. That day on the mountain, I hadn't just rescued my family, I had rescued myself from the draining, pointless quest for their approval. I had proved my worth to them, yes, but somewhere in the midst of the terror and the digging, I had proved it to the last person who needed to be convinced, myself. I no longer needed them to validate me. Their newfound respect was nice. It was healing, but it was a bonus, not the main prize. My self-worth was my own, forged in the military, honed by my training, and solidified under a mountain of snow. It was quiet, it was solid, and it needed no one's permission to exist. They say that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but sometimes it just reveals the strength that was there all along. My family saw my reliance on Ranger as a weakness, a sign that I was broken beyond repair, but they were wrong. That bond, that partnership they dismissed, was never a crutch, it was a lifeline. And it taught us all that sometimes the very thing people call your weakness is the quiet, unassuming cornerstone of your greatest strength. True strength isn't about being invincible. It's about knowing your vulnerabilities and having the courage to build the right support system to navigate them. It's about finding your own Ranger, whatever form they may take. Thank you so much for joining me and listening to my story today. It's not always easy to talk about these things, but I think it's so important. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had a moment where something you were criticized for turned out to be a hidden strength? Share your story, because I promise, you are not alone. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and please subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. Remember that family is ultimately defined by love and respect, not just by blood. Thank you again for being here. I wish you all strength on your own journeys.